If Victor goes back in time and that leads to him becoming a powerful time traveler, how did he travel back in time the first time? Enough. That's it. I have been staying up way too late, way too many nights, drinking tea, thinking about how the heck this is possible. But I've got an answer. Time to clear up this timeline mess. There is only one, and I mean one, possible way for this all to make sense. But if you don't understand the ending overall, I recommend this video first. I'm not going to repeat myself explaining how Arcane ends. Link to that video now in the cards. This video is going to focus on the timeline stuff specifically. So I present to you timeline number 1. In this timeline, nobody goes back in time. Jace survives the snowstorm, guessing his mother dies. Victor forms a commune, ends up making the world he envisioned before Jace blew a hole through his chest, still ends up being fields of dreamless solitude, and Victor confirms this in his speech at the end.
I thought I could bring an end to the world's suffering. All that remained were fields of dreamless solitude. There is no prize to perfection, only an end to pursuit.
This has to be the case because evolved Victor's existence cannot be a requirement for evolved Victor to exist. Like if there is no cookies, but you need a cookie to get a cookie, you'll never get a cookie. So there's one timeline where Victor doesn't go back in time. Jace still somehow becomes fixated on Arcane. He creates Hex Tech. Perhaps in this timeline, he thinks that the Arcane could have saved his mother. That's just me guessing. We still end up with this commune Victor, and he's the one who's shifting timelines. He's not in his timeline anymore. He comes to a different timeline to present Victor with this message. Now, what do I mean by shifting timelines? I mean that every time he goes back and gives Jace a new rune, that becomes a new timeline. It doesn't disintegrate or delete his original timeline because that's a timeline that made him him. He can't go back in time and change the past. To change the future in his timeline, that future has already happened. When you change the past, you create a new, separate timeline, divergent from the original timeline that includes that past event. Anyways, the no time travel timeline is the timeline this Victor comes from, and this place he brings Jace to is not that timeline. Like I was saying, you can't change the future by going back to the past. It doesn't change the future, it creates a new timeline. So what Jace is seeing here, this doesn't fix or resolve because Jace goes back and fixes everything. But this is really interesting because this is still an acceleration rune timeline because we see the ship here. That means that Echo definitely went back here, saved Jinx, and then Jinx and Echo go and fight Noxus and try to save everyone. Because this ship wouldn't exist without Jinx. In order for Jinx to still be alive, Echo has to return from that other timeline, and in order for that to happen, there has to be an acceleration rune present.
How did you stumble upon that?
I was playing with inversions on Jace's acceleration rune.
How far?
So let's focus in on Anomaly Victor. What does he really do? He keeps going back in time, giving Jace different runes. Because he was close to Jace, and he knows that Jace is the only one who can show him how things end, who can deliver this message to himself. Now, any other rune, other than the acceleration rune, everything happens exactly the same except Echo doesn't return. Because no acceleration rune, no Z drive. And I know what you're thinking, oh, that's not the case. Things change a lot if you give him a different rune, because look at the Vi's dead timeline. That timeline is not different because Vi dies. That timeline is different because Heimerdinger travels back in time 3 years ahead of where all these events take place and fixes a lot of the mistakes that he feels like he makes. So let's get an idea of where those 3 years would pop Heimerdinger out in terms of our timeline, the main timeline that we see throughout Arcane. How old is Jace in Act 1 when Heimerdinger and Jace first come across each other?
How old are you, my boy?
I'm 24.
Now, looking at a tweet from Amanda Overton, who was one of the writers on the Arcane show, she says approximately 6 to 7 years passed between the time skip episodes. That would mean Jace is around 30 to 31 years old when everything hits the fan. And that would mean when Heimerdinger came out of the anomaly in this alternate timeline, he was in the middle of that time skip, stuff we didn't see 3 years before everything happened. What he does with that additional time is fix all the mistakes that he made, and he feels like he made mistakes with Jace. Think about what he tells Echo here.
Tampering with the Arcane never ends well, lad. The risk is far too great.
I need a professor.
Oh, blast nozzles. How could I forsake a brilliant lad in need? Again,
He probably further guides Jace instead of just telling him magic is dangerous and it's a burden only I carry, you never understand. He further guides Jace to the right path where we don't end up with this horrible end where everyone is evolved by Victor. Unfortunately, in this timeline, that would mean Victor just dies of his disease. Or who knows, maybe when Jace is not fully consumed by Hextech and giving speeches, he's able to invest more time into helping Victor find a cure for his disease. And so maybe they were still working on that while we're watching Echo and Heimerdinger try to find a way back to their own timeline. What's another thing that we learned from Echo and Heimerdinger traveling to this alternate timeline in the past and Jace traveling to an alternate timeline in the future? Time continues on for all timelines equally. They don't pop back out exactly at the time when they went into the anomaly. They pop out in the future because time passed. So now we understand the Echo and Heimerdinger stuff. Let's get into Jace. First, let's get one thing clear. He did not travel to the future. Not the future in our timeline. That future in our timeline doesn't look like this. Because in the future of our timeline, not everyone is evolved. So that means this is a different timeline where we lose. Now, what's interesting about it is that we see this ship in the background. That means that Jinx is alive and fights, and we see Jace in this exact spot. That means that this is an acceleration rune timeline. This is a timeline where Victor goes back and gives Jace the acceleration rune. That means that this timeline is an acceleration rune, yet somehow we lose. That's the crazy part. I don't understand how we're losing here because the acceleration rune should mean that we win. That means that even with the acceleration rune, not all timelines result in us winning. Now, how we lose this, I don't know. But somehow the acceleration rune is in place in this timeline and we lose. The question I'd love to ask the people who created Arcane. Anything that I say would be complete speculation, literally tossing out a guess to you guys, but it could be any number of reasons as to why we lost. This being an alternate timeline also explains why the hammer is here and why it's different from the hammer that we have in our timeline, because this is the hammer of a Jace from a different timeline, and it looks like that Jace was a bit edgier because he had some points to it. Now let's get into the main problem with all of this. Victor had better solutions. One, I do think that Jace survives this snowstorm even if you leave him alone because of the original timeline, right, with Conclave Victor, who has to come about without time travel. But you could just make sure that Jace dies in the snowstorm. I mean, it's confirmed supposedly that Jace and Victor do die in the end, whether that's changed later, which they could do. As of right now, supposedly Jace and Victor do die and get sucked into the acceleration rune and just blip away. So if he's gonna die in the end, why not just kill him at the beginning? Wouldn't that kind of solve everything? Save hundreds of Piltover Noxians and random evolved lives. Or, even better, why not work with Heimerdinger? Why are you even working with Jace? Clearly Heimerdinger results in the better timeline. Just tell Heimerdinger everything, let him go back a couple of years, the guy's got an infinite lifespan anyways, and have him fix everything because this timeline looks way better than ours. It's at this point in my thinking where I thought to myself, they didn't know how popular the show was going to be. It was not intended to be canon, and the writers took a lot of artistic freedom with the whole multiverse timeline ending. That's not good enough. And that's not what we do here in the Grove. Here's where we come to. The Anomaly Victor, the one delivering this message to Jace to deliver to himself. He came to this end timeline with dreamless solitude, perfection, right? Glorious evolution achieved. He realized it's not a great thing, and so he goes back in time and creates an alternate timeline where that's not the case. Which doesn't do anything for his timeline, because his timeline is still just everything is glorious evolution, but he creates other timelines by doing this. What's his motivation? I have no idea. Like, he wants to see where things go without it being perfect, where everything continues to evolve. Another question I'd love to ask. But the main thing I'm trying to say is that we are not the best timeline. Of all the timelines that Victor created doing all of this, the best timeline that we at least saw was the one where Heimerdinger went back a couple years and got to fix a couple mistakes. There could be other timelines that are even better that this Conclave Victor created. And although our timeline is not the best one, could definitely make an argument that it's the most interesting. One last thing I want to point out is people keep saying, what's Piltover without Hextech? Piltover was the city of progress before Hextech. I mean, look at Noxus fighting Piltover. Piltovans have guns, while Noxus is still using crossbows. Piltover was great before Hextech, and it'll be great after Hextech. But that's it. Victor wanted to create a timeline with a better future, a future that evolved, not the glorious evolution. And our timeline is not the best possibility, but it's better than most. And I would say that it's more interesting as well. But what are your thoughts? Do you agree with my timeline theory? Do you think I'm a dummy? Let me know either way in the comment section below. If you like this video, be sure to like it, subscribe for future Runeterra lore videos, and the next video is going to be covering Mel, Embasa, and the future of Arcane. And then we're shifting back to Runeterra lore. I want to do the full lore of Embasa, her whole story all the way through to the end of Arcane. I got a Shurima video that I really want to do covering Azir. There's a ton of Runeterra lore. Arcane is literally just a small sliver of this world. We got tons of old videos you can explore until then. So be sure to subscribe for that. If you want to go above and beyond, sharing the video goes a long way. Big shout out to those of you who joined the channel. Thanks for stopping by the Grove, and I will see you in the next one.